stop everything you're doing right now. Before YouTube deletes this book, before this ancient knowledge disappears again into the shadows, before the world tries to bury these truths one more time, you need to read what's written here. Listen closely. What if I told you that everything you know about death is a lie? What if I told you that an ancient, hidden text claims to map out exactly what happens the moment you draw your last breath? A text so profound it doesn't just talk about the afterlife, it guides you through it, step by step, moment by moment, decision by decision. But here's the twist that changes everything. Miss one moment in this journey, and you risk eternal entrapment. Recognize the right moment, and you achieve instant liberation beyond anything you can imagine. Today, you're about to unlock the Tibetan Book of the Dead, a sacred guide crafted over 1,000 years ago in the hidden monasteries of Tibet, written to take us to the edge of existence and back. Reading this could change everything: how you live, how you die, what you believe about consciousness itself, and what you understand about the nature of reality. But know this, and know it well. Once you see this, there's no going back. Once these truths enter your awareness, you cannot unknow them. Your life will be divided into before and after this moment. Are you ready to confront the ultimate truth? Are you prepared to have everything you thought you knew about existence shattered and rebuilt? Because that's exactly what's about to happen. Let's begin. Introduction. The mystery that haunts humanity. Think about this for just a moment. Despite all our modern technology, despite all our scientific advancements, despite our ability to split atoms and send probes to the edge of the solar system, one question remains as elusive as ever, as mysterious today as it was 10,000 years ago. What happens after we die? The truth is, and this should humble us, we're no closer to understanding it than the people of ancient Tibet. We have more equipment, more data, more theory, but no more certainty. And maybe that's why this book still holds such power. Maybe that's why it still captures imaginations across the world, from monks in Himalayan caves to neuroscientists in university laboratories. It dares to answer life's biggest question with specificity and detail that should be impossible. Over centuries, this text has drawn the interest of mystics, spiritual seekers, psychologists, philosophers, and even hard-nosed scientists. Why? Because it makes a revolutionary claim that sounds absolutely insane to modern materialist ears. Consciousness doesn't end when our bodies die. Instead, it goes on a journey through unseen realms, each stage offering profound possibilities for liberation or rebirth. Each moment a crossroads between awakening and continued suffering. Each vision an opportunity to see through the illusion or be caught by it once again. But here's where things get even stranger, where the ancient wisdom and modern science start to converge in ways that should make you rethink everything you thought you knew about the nature of mind and reality. These ancient descriptions, written by Tibetan monks who never had access to modern resuscitation technology, who never interviewed people brought back from clinical death, match up almost perfectly with modern accounts of near-death experiences. People who have come back from clinical death, their hearts stopped for minutes, their brains showing no measurable activity, often talk about strikingly similar experiences. A brilliant light that feels like home, meetings with beings of profound wisdom and compassion, a sense of peace so overwhelming they didn't want to return to their bodies and a knowing deeper than belief that consciousness continues beyond physical death. Could it really be a coincidence? Could ancient Tibetan masters have simply guessed correctly about the neurology of dying? Or are we glimpsing something real about the very fabric of consciousness itself, something that transcends culture, time, and individual belief systems? Imagine the shocking implications if this is true. What if these teachings could unlock insights into our minds, our awareness, the very essence of who we are? What if studying this ancient text could help us understand the reality we live in and how we perceive it in ways we never thought possible? The potential here is staggering, linking ancient spiritual wisdom with today's cutting-edge explorations of consciousness, near-death studies, quantum physics, and the hard problem of consciousness that still baffles philosophers and scientists alike. But here's the real twist, the truth that makes this book truly revolutionary and immediately applicable to your life. Right now, the true power of the Tibetan Book of the Dead isn't just in its description of death. It's what it can teach us about life. By daring us to face death directly, to understand that everything is temporary and impermanent, it challenges us to live with a sense of purpose, clarity, and compassion that most of us never fully realize. It strips away the illusions we hide behind and forces us to confront what actually matters. It's not just a guide for the dying. It's a wake-up call for the living. It's a handbook for transformation that works whether you believe in literal afterlife realms or see them as metaphors for psychological states. As you read this, you might feel a mix of awe and fear, curiosity and resistance. That's exactly the reaction it was meant to provoke. These teachings are designed to shake you out of complacency, to make you question your assumptions, to wake you up from the trance of ordinary life. So I invite you, no, I challenge you to keep an open mind as we dive deeper. Because to truly understand this ancient wisdom, we need to explore not just what it says about death, but what it reveals about consciousness, about the mind's power to create reality, and about the opportunities for transformation that exist in every moment of your life. The Tibetan Book of the Dead isn't asking you to believe anything. It's inviting you to look directly at your own experience, to investigate the nature of your own mind, and to discover truths that have been hidden in plain sight your entire life. Are you ready for that? Are you ready to question everything? Because what comes next will challenge every comfortable assumption you hold about who you are, what reality is, and what's possible for human consciousness. The journey begins now, and I promise you, nothing will ever be quite the same again. Chapter 1. What is a bardo? The revolutionary framework. What if I told you that the Tibetan Book of the Dead isn't just for the dying? What if it's actually a roadmap designed for anyone navigating the profound transitions of life, which, if you think about it, is all of us all the time? At the heart of this extraordinary teaching lies the concept of the bardo, and understanding this concept will change how you see every experience you have. In Tibetan Buddhism, a bardo isn't just a state between death and rebirth. That's the most famous application. Yes, but it's much broader and more immediately relevant than that. A bardo is any transitional phase where everything familiar dissolves, where solid ground gives way, opening a doorway to profound transformation. Think about it. Really think about it. How many times in your life have you found yourself suspended between what was and what's yet to be? Those moments of uncertainty, those times of change and potential, those periods when your old identity no longer fits, but a new one hasn't yet formed. Each one is a bardo. The moment your long-term relationship ended and you suddenly didn't know who you were without that person, that was a bardo. The day you got fired from the job you'd built your identity around, and your entire sense of self crumbled. That was a bardo. That disorienting feeling when you wake up in an unfamiliar place, and for a split second you don't know where or even who you are. That's a microbardo, a glimpse of the groundlessness that the dying experience more intensely. But here's what most people miss. What makes this teaching so powerful and immediately applicable? These aren't just difficult moments to endure. They're not problems to solve as quickly as possible so you can get back to normal. They're portals, opportunities for transformation disguised as chaos and confusion. The word bardo literally means in between or intermediate state in Tibetan. But that simple translation doesn't capture the profound understanding embedded in the concept. A bardo is a gap, a space between two states of being, and in that gap lies tremendous power, the power to wake up, to see clearly, to make conscious choices instead of falling back into old patterns. Think about when you're between jobs. You're not employed anymore, but you haven't started the new position yet. You're in the gap. Or when you're moving between homes, you've left one place, but haven't fully settled into the next. You're literally in between, ungrounded, floating. These gaps make people uncomfortable. We rush to fill them to get back to solid ground as fast as possible. But the Tibetan teachings say, wait. Don't rush. This gap, this bardo, is actually where transformation happens. This is where you have the freedom to choose who you'll become next, rather than just defaulting to who you've always been. Now here's where the Tibetan Book of the Dead, also known as the Bardo Theta, which translates as liberation through hearing in the intermediate state, goes deeper and becomes truly revolutionary. It reveals not one but three major bardos related to death and rebirth, each representing a crucial stage in consciousness, each offering unique challenges and opportunities for growth and liberation. But as we explore these three bardos of death, I want you to keep asking yourself, where do I see these patterns in my life right now? Are you ready to explore these hidden realms? Because understanding them will give you a map not just for death, but for every transition you'll ever face. Chapter 2. The First Bardo, the Moment of Death. The initial bardo is called the Chikai Bardo, the bardo at the moment of death itself. But don't think of it as simply an ending, as the lights going out, as nothingness descending. That's the materialist view, and the Tibetan teachings say it's completely wrong. Instead, imagine a blinding flash of pure consciousness, a moment of absolute clarity, where the deepest truths of existence are revealed. Picture the most profound moment of insight you've ever had, then multiply its intensity and clarity by infinity. That's closer to what the text describe. In that instant when your heart stops beating, when your last breath escapes your lips, when the electrical activity in your brain begins to fade, Tibetan Buddhism teaches that something extraordinary happens, perhaps the most extraordinary thing that can ever happen to consciousness. Your awareness, suddenly freed from its earthly bounds, from the constant demands and distractions of maintaining a physical body, encounters what the texts call the clear light, a brilliance so pure, so overwhelming, so all-encompassing, that it contains within it the ultimate nature of reality itself. This isn't a light you see with physical eyes, because you no longer have physical eyes. This is the luminous nature of consciousness itself, awareness recognizing its own essence, the mind seeing its own true face for the first time, without the distortions of thought, concept, belief, or identity. And here's the mind-blowing part, the promise that seems too good to be true, but that the texts insist is absolutely real. If you can recognize this light as your own true essence, as your own awareness laid bare, as what you've always been beneath all the layers of identity and story, you can achieve ultimate liberation in a single instant. No more cycles of birth and death. No more suffering, no more confusion, no more separation, no more seeking. Everything resolved, everything complete, everything perfect, in one moment of recognition. This is called liberation in the clear light, and it's considered the highest, most immediate, most direct form of enlightenment described in Tibetan Buddhism. You don't need decades of meditation practice. You don't need to perfect yourself morally. You don't need to understand complex philosophy. You just need to recognize what's right there, to see your own face, your own nature, your own deepest essence reflected in that brilliant light. But and this is crucial, this moment is fleeting, lasting only an instant before it begins to fade. The texts compare it to a flash of lightning illuminating the night sky, there and gone, brilliant and brief. And for most people, unprepared and overwhelmed by the intensity, this ultimate opportunity slips away like a dream upon waking, like trying to hold water in your hands. Think about this. You've spent your entire life identified with your body, your thoughts, your personality, your story. That's who you think you are. That's what you've been defending and maintaining and trying to improve. And suddenly, all of that is gone, just gone, not there anymore. What you encounter instead is pure awareness, vast, open, luminous, with no reference points, no boundaries, no familiar landmarks. For someone unprepared, this isn't liberation. This is terrifying. This is the annihilation of everything they think they are. So instead of recognizing it as their own nature, they perceive it as an external force, something foreign and overwhelming. And with this fear comes retreat, pulling back, trying to find something solid and familiar to hold on to. And in that retreat, consciousness pulls itself deeper into the realms of the bardos, moving away from enlightenment and toward rebirth. But here's the incredible truth. This opportunity isn't just reserved for the moment of death. Tibetan masters teach that through deep meditation and spiritual practice, you can encounter glimpses of the clear light even in life. Think about your own experience. Have you ever had a moment, maybe in deep meditation, maybe in nature, maybe in a moment of crisis or creative flow when your usual sense of self temporarily disappeared? When there was just awareness, just presence, just being, without the constant commentary of thought? If you have, that's a glimpse of the clear light. The difference is that in the moment of death, this isn't a brief meditation experience. This is your entire reality, happening at an intensity beyond anything you've experienced while alive. So how does one prepare? Through mindfulness, meditation, and spiritual practice, you train the mind to recognize the nature of awareness itself. Not the contents of awareness, not the thoughts, emotions, sensations, but awareness itself, the consciousness that's aware of all of that. Every time you sit in meditation and watch thoughts arise and dissolve without clinging to them, you're practicing for the moment of death. Every time you let go of control and trust the unknown, you're building the capacity to merge with the clear light instead of retreating from it. Now let's talk about what modern near-death research has found, because this is where ancient wisdom and contemporary science converge in remarkable ways. Thousands of people who've been clinically dead hearts stopped, breathing ceased, brains showing no activity, have been brought back and report strikingly similar experiences. A brilliant light, overwhelming peace, unconditional love, and a feeling that this was more real than ordinary life. Sound familiar? It's exactly what the Tibetan Book of the Dead described over 1,000 years ago. Skeptics say these are hallucinations from a dying brain. Maybe. But how did Tibetan masters know to describe these exact experiences centuries before modern resuscitation technology? It's an impossible coincidence, or they discovered something real through contemplative practice. The clear light will appear for everyone at death. The question is, will you recognize it? Chapter 3. The second bardo, the theater of your mind. For those who miss the clear light, who retreat in fear or fail to recognize it, the journey continues into the second bardo, the Chanyad bardo, the bardo of visions. This is where things get truly wild and revealing about the nature of mind. Your consciousness, no longer anchored in a physical body, begins to project elaborate visions. Peaceful deities appear first beings of radiant beauty, profound compassion, and infinite wisdom. Then wrathful deities emerge, terrifying figures with multiple heads and arms, surrounded by flames, fierce and overwhelming. But here's the revolutionary insight. These aren't external beings. They're not gods or demons existing independently. They are projections of your own mind, reflections of everything you carry within. The peaceful deities represent your own highest qualities, your Buddha nature, your capacity for wisdom and compassion. The wrathful deities embody the parts you denied, your shadow, your unresolved anger, your repressed power. Every god and demon is a mirror asking, will you recognize these as aspects of your own consciousness? Or will you take them as separate external forces? Let's start with the peaceful deities. Picture yourself surrounded by luminous beings, like the Buddha of infinite light, radiating colors that seem to contain all wisdom. These beings represent different aspects of enlightened consciousness mirror like wisdom, the wisdom of equality, discriminating wisdom. Their presence isn't just serene, it's overwhelming. And here's the challenge. Can you recognize these as reflections of your own mind? Can you embrace them as your own deepest nature? If you can, liberation happens right there. But for many, this encounter is too much. The mind, unprepared to recognize its own brilliance, retreats. And as it does, the vision shifts. Now the wrathful deities appear, fierce beings with faces of fire and fury. These aren't enemies, they're manifestations of everything unresolved within you. Your anger, your fear, your denied power, all externalized and demanding to be acknowledged. Can you face these forces without retreating in fear? The purpose is profound. This isn't punishment. It's an invitation to see the raw truth of your own mind. The peaceful and wrathful spirits are like shadows cast by your consciousness, showing you everything that has shaped your life, the attachments, the fears, the unacknowledged desires. Think about how this applies to your life now. When you dream at night, the people and places seem real while you're dreaming, right? It's only when you wake up that you realize your mind created it all. The second bardo is the same, except you won't wake up by rolling over in bed. The only way out is through recognition, seeing that what appears external is actually internal. Psychologist Carl Jung saw the gods and demons of the Tibetan Book of the Dead as archetypes, universal figures in our collective unconscious. He wrote, "Gods and demons are projections of the unconscious, powerful and inescapable until understood as parts of ourselves." The second bardo isn't just about facing fear. It's about integrating every part of your mind. Can you look at your darkest parts with compassion? Can you confront your shadows without letting them control you? This is liberation, recognizing that all these forces are projections of your mind. But there's a warning for those who fail to recognize these as projections. The experience becomes terrifying. The mind, unable to grasp its own nature, becomes trapped, mistaking its own creations for external threats. If you don't recognize these projections as your own mind, you descend further into cycles of fear and delusion, bound by the very attachments you couldn't face. Chapter 4. The third bardo, where karma takes form. Now imagine drifting in a formless sea. The life you knew is gone, yet something pulls you forward, a force as magnetic as gravity. You've entered the Siddha bardo, the bardo of becoming, the threshold of rebirth. In this realm, every thought, every unresolved emotion, every karmic imprint becomes the guiding force determining your next life. Your consciousness is now a magnet, pulling in the elements that will shape your future existence. This isn't passive drifting. It's intense, chaotic creation. Every choice, every desire, every hidden fear comes to the surface, generating the reality that awaits you. Picture yourself surrounded by a swirl of visions, faces, landscapes, entire worlds. Each is a potential path. These aren't random, they're the sum of your inner state. If you cultivated kindness and wisdom, the visions are bright and inviting. If fear and anger dominated, the visions are dark and tumultuous. Each potential rebirth pulls at you, tugging on invisible threads of karma, drawing you toward the life you're most aligned with. Here's the stark truth. You don't consciously choose a new life like picking items from a menu. Your accumulated karma, every action, thought, intention acts like gravity, guiding you toward a life matching your soul's current frequency. The text describes visions of different realms, God realms of blissful pride, jealous God realms of competitive striving, human realms with their balance of pleasure and pain, animal realms of pure instinct, hungry ghost realms of insatiable craving, and hell realms of intense aggression. You might see couples and feel drawn toward one, which pulls you into conception as their child. Your unresolved patterns determine where you go. The Siddha bardo reveals karma isn't punishment or reward. It's simply a law of the universe, a reflection of your mind projected onto reality. But there's hope. If you maintain clarity and calm awareness, you might influence the outcome. If you remained detached, recognizing visions as products of your mind, you might transcend the pull altogether. The third bardo forces a profound truth. We're constantly creating the karma, shaping our soul's journey. Every moment of awareness you cultivate in life is a step toward liberation. And here's where it connects to your life now. You don't have to wait for death to experience these bardos. Every day contains these transitions opportunities for awakening. That disorientation between sleep and waking, a mini-first bardo. Those moments of creative flow when time dissolves, touching the second bardo. Every major life choice where you feel pulled in different directions, your own third bardo. The question isn't whether you'll face bardos you already are. The question is, are you navigating them consciously or unconsciously? How you handle small deaths in life transitions, uncertainties, moments when everything falls apart, that's how you'll handle the ultimate death. Every moment is training. Every choice is preparation. So ask yourself, what bardo are you in right now? What transition are you facing? And more importantly, are you awake to the opportunity it presents? Because recognizing bardos in daily life isn't just philosophy. It's the key to transforming your entire experience of existence, starting right now. Chapter 5. Entering the Realm of Projections. Let me ask you something uncomfortable. What if everything you're running from in life is actually a part of yourself that you refuse to acknowledge? What if the people who trigger you the most are mirrors reflecting back the very qualities you've buried in your unconscious? This isn't just psychological theory. This is the lived reality of the second bardo, and it's operating in your life right now, whether you recognize it or not. We've touched on the second bardo, the Chanyad bardo, the bardo of visions, but now we need to go deeper. Because understanding this stage isn't just about what happens after death. It's about understanding how your mind works every single day, how you create your reality through projection, and why you keep encountering the same patterns over and over again. The second bardo is often described as the most elaborate, most intense, most revealing stage of the after-death journey. It's where consciousness, freed from the constraints of a physical body, but not yet pulled into rebirth, encounters the full spectrum of its own nature made visible. But here's what makes this teaching so immediately practical. Your mind is doing this right now. You're constantly projecting your internal states onto the external world, creating experiences that reflect what's happening inside you, and then reacting to these projections as if they're separate from you. Have you ever noticed how the same situation can affect two people completely differently? One person encounters a challenge and sees an opportunity for growth. Another sees the same challenge as a personal attack or insurmountable obstacle. What's different? Not the external situation, that's the same. What's different is the internal landscape being projected onto it. This is the mechanism of the second bardo, just operating at a more subtle level in daily life. Now, in the actual bardo after death, this projection process becomes overwhelming. Without a physical body to ground you, without the familiar routines and identities to anchor your sense of self, your mind's creative power goes into overdrive. Everything you've ever thought, felt, feared, desired, denied, or aspired to, all of it erupts into consciousness and takes form, not metaphorically. According to the texts, these projections appear as vivid, convincing, absolutely real experiences of beings, realms, lights, and visions. The peaceful deities appear first. Over what the text describe as several days, though time doesn't work the same way without a body. These are manifestations of your enlightened qualities, your Buddha nature, all the wisdom and compassion that exists within you, but that you may never have fully recognized or owned. Then the wrathful deities emerge fierce, terrifying, overwhelming. These are the same enlightened qualities, but in their wrathful aspect, combined with all the shadow material you've been suppressing. Your anger, your power, your sexuality, your aggression, everything you've been taught is bad or wrong or not spiritual. And here's the key teaching that runs through the entire second bardo. If you can recognize any of these appearances as your own mind, as projections of your own consciousness rather than external beings or forces, you can achieve liberation right there. You don't have to make it through all the stages. You don't have to face every deity. The moment you truly recognize, not just intellectually understand, but directly see that this is your own mind creating these experiences, you're free. But most consciousness can't make this recognition. The visions are too convincing, too overwhelming, too different from anything encountered in ordinary life. And so the journey continues deeper into complexity, closer to inevitable rebirth. Think about this in terms of your life right now. How many times have you been convinced that the problem is out there, in that person, that situation, that circumstance, when actually the real issue is your relationship to it, your interpretation of it, your projection onto it? How many times have you blamed someone for making you angry when actually they just triggered anger that was already in you waiting to be activated? How many times have you seen someone as having qualities you lack wisdom, confidence, creativity, when actually you wouldn't recognize those qualities in them if they didn't already exist as potential within you? This is the second bardo operating in everyday life, and the liberation is the same. Recognize the projection, see it as your own mind, and suddenly you're not trapped by it anymore. Chapter 6, The Peaceful Deities, Meeting Your Highest Self. Now let's go deeper into the specific visions of the second bardo, starting with the peaceful deities. Because understanding what these represent will change how you see your own potential and why you keep sabotaging yourself. The texts describe the peaceful deities appearing in elaborate sequences, each one associated with specific colors, specific wisdoms, specific days. And while the cultural wrapping is Tibetan Buddhist, the psychological and spiritual truths underneath are universal. The first to appear is typically Vairocana, the Buddha of infinite light, radiating brilliant blue light. This Buddha represents the Dharma Dhyatu wisdom, the wisdom of the ultimate nature of reality, the direct seeing of things as they are without conceptual overlay. Imagine encountering this, a being of such radiant presence, such complete clarity, that just being in their field makes you aware of how clouded your own perception has been. Not in a judgmental way, but in a way that's both humbling and liberating. This Buddha, this peaceful deity, is showing you your own potential for clear seeing. It's saying this capacity exists in you. This wisdom is your nature. Do you recognize it? But alongside this brilliant blue light, the texts say a softer, dimmer white light appears, the light of the God realm, representing comfortable ignorance, pleasant illusion. And most consciousness, overwhelmed by the intensity of the brilliant blue light, turns toward the softer white light instead. Think about this pattern in your life. How many times have you had a moment of brutal clarity, seeing exactly what you need to do, what needs to change, what truth you've been avoiding, and then immediately turned away from it toward something more comfortable. Maybe I'm being too hard on myself. Maybe it's not that bad. Maybe I should just... And the moment of clarity passes, and you're back in familiar patterns. That's the same choice, the brilliant light of truth versus the softer light of comfortable delusion. The text describes several more peaceful deities appearing in sequence. Vajrasattva, radiating white light, represents mirror-like wisdom consciousness that reflects reality perfectly without distortion. Think about how rare this is. Your mind is constantly distorting, interpreting, judging, comparing, filtering everything through past experiences and future anxieties. Mirror-like wisdom is seeing without that distortion. It's perfect clarity, perfect objectivity, while still being fully aware and engaged. Ratnasambhava, radiating yellow light, embodies the wisdom of equality, the recognition that all beings, all experiences, all phenomena are equal in their essential nature. This wisdom dissolves the root of pride and inferiority, of feeling special or deficient. It sees the Buddha nature, the fundamental worthiness in everything. Amitabha, radiating red light, represents discriminating wisdom, the clear ability to distinguish between what leads to freedom and what leads to suffering, between wisdom and confusion, between skillful and unskillful action. This isn't discrimination in the negative sense. It's precision and clarity combined with compassion. Amagasiddhi, radiating green light, embodies all-accomplishing wisdom action that flows effortlessly because it's aligned with the true nature of reality. This is the end of self-doubt, the end of second-guessing, the end of wondering if you're doing enough or doing it right. It's perfect confidence that comes not from ego, but from being aligned with truth itself. Now, here's what you need to understand. These aren't just exotic Tibetan Buddhist concepts. These are describing actual capacities of consciousness, actual potentials that exist within you right now. When have you experienced mirror-like wisdom? Maybe in a moment of meditation when your mind was completely still and you saw something exactly as it was, without your usual filters and interpretations. When have you touched the wisdom of equality? Maybe when you looked at someone you usually judge and suddenly saw their humanity, their struggle, their fundamental similarity to you. When have you experienced all-accomplishing wisdom? Maybe in a moment of flow when you were creating something or solving a problem, and everything just worked effortlessly, perfectly, without forcing. These moments aren't anomalies. They're glimpses of your true nature, brief appearances of the peaceful deities in your everyday life. But here's the tragedy. Most people experience these moments and immediately discount them. Oh, I just got lucky. That wasn't really me. That was a fluke, an exception. This is exactly what happens in the second bardo. The peaceful deities appear, showing you your own enlightened nature, and consciousness thinks, that can't be me. I'm just an ordinary person with flaws and limitations. That kind of perfection, that kind of wisdom, that's not mine to claim. And in thinking this, in rejecting your own highest nature, you miss the opportunity for liberation. The texts emphasize over and over, these peaceful deities are not separate from you. They're not external beings that you need to worship or appease. They're aspects of your own consciousness, qualities you already possess, but haven't fully recognized or owned. The question isn't, how do I become like them? The question is, can I recognize them as what I already am beneath all my limiting beliefs and identities? And here's where the teaching becomes urgently practical. You don't have to wait until death to work with this. Right now in your life, you can start owning your own wisdom, your own clarity, your own enlightened qualities. Every time you have a moment of real insight and you acknowledge, this is my wisdom speaking, you're preparing to recognize the peaceful deities. Every time you act with genuine compassion and you own it, this is who I really am, rather than dismissing it as nothing special, you're building the capacity to recognize your Buddha nature when it appears in full force. Every time you catch yourself diminishing your own highest qualities, and you consciously choose to acknowledge them instead, you're doing the work that will pay off in the second bardo. Carl Jung, the Swiss psychiatrist who studied this text extensively, called this the integration of the self-recognizing and owning your full potential rather than staying identified with the limited ego. He noticed that when patients had dreams or experiences of the self, they almost always couldn't accept it. It seemed too grand, too numinous, too unlike their ordinary identity. But Jung emphasized that this integration, this acceptance of the self, was essential for psychological health and spiritual maturity. The peaceful deities are the self in Buddhist terms. They're the wholeness, the completeness, the enlightened nature that's always been there, but that you've been too afraid or too conditioned to recognize. So let me ask you directly, what's your relationship with your own highest qualities? When you experience moments of wisdom, clarity, or compassion, do you own them? Do you say, this is my true nature? Or do you dismiss them as flukes, as temporary states that aren't really you? Because how you answer that question determines whether you'll recognize the peaceful deities when they appear in full intensity in the bardo. And it determines whether you're living from your highest self now, or staying trapped in a limited, contracted version of who you really are. Chapter 7. The Wrathful Deities Your Shadow Unleashed. Everything just got darker. The peaceful deities offered liberation, showed you your Buddha nature in its most radiant form. But you turned away. You couldn't accept it. You couldn't recognize yourself in that mirror of perfection. And now compassion that appeared gentle transforms into something fierce, terrifying, and absolutely relentless. Welcome to the wrathful deities. Picture this: beings with multiple heads, each one more terrifying than the last. Fangs dripping with what looks like blood, eyes blazing with fire, necklaces made of freshly severed heads, bodies wrapped in flayed human skins, drinking from skull cups, trampling corpses underfoot, surrounded by flames and darkness, making gestures that seem to threaten complete annihilation. This is nightmare fuel. This is the stuff of horror movies. And according to the Tibetan Book of the Dead, this is what appears next in the second bardo. Your first instinct, your immediate gut-level reaction, is probably the same as most people's. Run, hide, get away from these terrifying beings, whatever it takes. But here's the revolutionary teaching, the insight that makes this more than just religious mythology. These wrathful deities are the exact same enlightened consciousness as the peaceful ones. They're not demons. They're not evil. They're not punishments for turning away. They're fierce compassion. They're the wrathful aspect of love. They're your own Buddha nature refusing to give up on you, even if it has to terrify you into recognition. Think about this. Have you ever loved someone so much that you had to tell them a harsh truth? Have you ever cared about someone enough to risk their anger by confronting them about a destructive pattern? Have you ever had to be fierce with someone precisely because you wanted to help them? That's wrathful compassion. It doesn't look nice. It doesn't feel comfortable. But it's motivated by love, not hatred. The wrathful deities are that same energy, amplified to cosmic proportions. They're appearing in this fierce form because gentle didn't work. You missed the peaceful deities. You couldn't accept your own radiance. So now reality is going to strip away your pretenses by force. But there's another layer to this, one that goes even deeper into the human psyche and explains why these visions are so terrifying. The wrathful deities don't just represent fierce compassion from outside. They represent everything you've been repressing within yourself. All your anger, all your rage, all your destructive impulses, all your shadow sexuality, all your power that you were afraid to claim, all your darkness that you pretended didn't exist. It's all coming out now, externalized into these terrifying forms, demanding to be seen and acknowledged. And here's where it gets really interesting. The texts describe specific wrathful deities appearing, each one corresponding to one of the peaceful deities you encountered earlier. They're not different beings. They're the same consciousness, showing you both its peaceful and wrathful aspects. The Heroica deities appear wrathful forms of the 5 Buddha families, each with their consorts in sexual union, surrounded by flames, adorned with skulls and bones, fierce beyond imagining. They represent the transformation of the 5 poisons: ignorance, attachment, aversion, pride, jealousy, into the 5 wisdoms. But they do it through destruction, through burning away what's false, through fierce truth-telling that destroys comfortable illusions. Think about a time in your life when something had to be destroyed before something new could be built. Maybe a relationship that had to end even though the ending was painful. Maybe an identity that had to die before you could grow. Maybe a belief system that had to be shattered before truth could emerge. That's the energy of the wrathful deities. They're not creating new suffering. They're burning away the causes of suffering, even though the process feels like destruction. Then the blood-drinking deities appear. Now it gets even more intense. Deities that seem to be drinking blood, consuming flesh, reveling in what looks like pure violence and destruction. For most Western audiences, this imagery is almost impossible to process. It seems demonic, evil, the antithesis of everything spiritual. But here's what the symbolism represents. These deities are consuming ego, drinking the blood of self-clinging, devouring the flesh of attachment. They're not attacking you. They're attacking everything that keeps you trapped in suffering. Blood in this context represents the life force of ego, the energy that keeps the false self intact. These deities are draining that energy, forcing ego death, creating the space for true self to emerge. Have you ever gone through an experience so intense that your entire sense of who you were got shattered? Maybe a crisis, a loss, a complete breakdown. In those moments, it can feel like something is consuming you, destroying you. But often what's actually happening is that a false self is dying so a truer self can emerge. That's the blood-drinking deities in action, not in the bardo, but in life itself. Perhaps the most terrifying of all is Mahakala, the great black one, a wrathful deity so fierce that even his image can be disturbing. Multiple heads, multiple arms, each holding weapons or ritual implements, surrounded by flames, standing on corpses. But Mahakala, despite his terrifying appearance, is actually a protective deity. He's protecting the Dharma, protecting truth, destroying obstacles to enlightenment. He's fierce because truth requires fierce protection in a world full of delusion. Think about the fiercest protection you've ever felt or offered. A mother protecting her child from danger. A warrior defending the innocent. A teacher refusing to let a student settle for less than their potential, even if it means being tough. That fierceness, that absolute refusal to compromise on what matters, that's what Mahakala represents. And psychologically, he represents the part of you that's willing to destroy anything that gets in the way of your liberation. Not out of anger or hatred, but out of an absolute commitment to freedom. Now, here's what the Tibetan Book of the Dead emphasizes over and over about these wrathful deities. If you can recognize them as projections of your own mind, if you can see them as manifestations of your own enlightened nature appearing in fierce form, they transform instantly. The demon becomes the deity. The terrorizing presence becomes a protector. The force that seemed to threaten your destruction becomes the very thing that liberates you. But this recognition requires something most people don't have: the courage to face your shadow without running, the willingness to acknowledge the darkness within yourself, the capacity to see that your anger, your power, your shadow sexuality, all of it can be transformed rather than repressed. Carl Jung spent his career emphasizing exactly this point. He said you can't integrate what you won't acknowledge. The shadow doesn't disappear because you ignore it. It just operates unconsciously, sabotaging you in ways you don't recognize. In his work with patients, Jung noticed that the shadow often appeared in dreams as dark, threatening figures, sometimes as demons or monsters, sometimes as criminals or enemies. And people's instinct was always to run, to fight, to push these figures away. But Jung taught that you had to do the opposite. Turn toward the shadow figure, engage with it, ask what it wants, what it represents. And when people could do this, when they could face their shadow with curiosity, instead of fear, the figure often transformed. The monster became an ally. The enemy revealed itself as a repressed part of the self that just wanted to be integrated. This is exactly what the Tibetan teachings say about the wrathful deities. They appear terrifying because you've made them terrifying by denying them. They're fierce because they have to break through layers of resistance and repression. But they're not your enemies. They're parts of yourself that have been exiled to the shadows, and they're demanding to be seen, acknowledged, and integrated. Let me ask you something personal. What parts of yourself are you most afraid of? What do you refuse to look at? Is it your anger, your sexuality, your desire for power, your capacity for cruelty, your selfishness? Whatever it is, that's what will appear as wrathful deities in the second bardo. Not to punish you, but to force you to finally face it, acknowledge it, and transform it. And here's the beautiful, terrifying truth. These parts of yourself aren't evil. They're not bad. They're just energy, raw life force that got distorted because you rejected it instead of integrating it. Anger, properly transformed, becomes clarity and the ability to set boundaries. It becomes the fierce compassion of Mahakala. Sexuality, properly integrated, becomes creative life force and spiritual power. The desire for power, properly understood, becomes the capacity to actually help others and create change in the world. Even what seems like cruelty or destructiveness, when you look at it honestly, often turns out to be distorted self-protection or a twisted expression of care. And when you can see that, when you can understand the root of it, you can transform it into something skillful. But this transformation only happens through recognition and integration, not through continued rejection and repression. The wrathful deities are offering you this opportunity. They're saying, "Look at me. I'm terrifying because you've made me terrifying by denying me. But I'm actually your own power, your own life force, distorted by rejection. Accept me, integrate me, and I become an ally instead of an enemy." So how do you prepare for the wrathful deities? How do you develop the capacity to face them without being overwhelmed? You start now in this life by doing shadow work, by looking at the parts of yourself you'd rather not acknowledge, by bringing consciousness to your anger, your jealousy, your shame, your fear, all the emotions and impulses you've been taught to hide. Therapy can be incredibly valuable for this. A good therapist creates a safe space to explore your shadow without judgment, helping you see that these rejected parts aren't evil, just human, and they can be integrated. Meditation is crucial, particularly practices that work with difficult emotions. Instead of trying to achieve some peaceful, blissed-out state, you practice sitting with discomfort, staying present with anger or fear or desire without acting on it or pushing it away. Creative expression can be powerful too. Write about your darkest thoughts. Paint your shadow. Dance your anger. Give these rejected parts of yourself a voice, a form, a way to be seen and acknowledged. And perhaps most importantly, practice self-compassion. The shadow grows more monstrous the more you judge and reject it. But when you can look at your own darkness with compassion, understanding that it arose from pain, from conditioning, from survival strategies that once served a purpose, when you can do that, it loses its power to terrorize you. This is the work. This is how you prepare for the wrathful deities, not by becoming perfect, but by becoming whole. Not by eliminating your shadow, but by integrating it. Because here's what the teachings promise. If you can face the wrathful deities without being overwhelmed, if you can recognize them as your own mind, they become your greatest protectors and allies. They use their fierce power in service of your liberation. But if you run, if you're overwhelmed by fear, and refuse to recognize them, you move deeper into the bardo, closer to inevitable rebirth, still carrying all that unintegrated shadow into your next life where it will create the same patterns all over again. So which will it be? Will you start doing this work now while you have the support and resources to do it skillfully? Or will you wait until the wrathful deities appear in the bardo, when you're alone with your own mind unleashed, with nowhere to run and nowhere to hide? The choice seems obvious when you put it that way, but somehow most people still choose avoidance. They still push their shadow down, still pretend their darkness doesn't exist. Still hope they can escape the inevitable confrontation. They can't, and neither can you. The wrathful deities are coming, whether in this life through crisis and breakdown or in the bardo after death. The only question is whether you'll be ready to face them with courage and recognition, or whether you'll be overwhelmed by fear. What's hiding in your shadow right now? And are you brave enough to look? Chapter 8. Carl Jung and the Universal Patterns. Now let's step back from the Tibetan imagery for a moment and ask a crucial question that might be on your mind. Are the peaceful and wrathful deities actually real? That might seem like a strange question after everything we've explored, but it's essential because how you answer it determines whether you can actually use this ancient wisdom in your life or whether you dismiss it as exotic religious mythology. If you think the answer is simply yes, they're real external beings, or no, they're just primitive superstition, you've missed the point entirely. The truth is far more interesting and far more useful than either of those simple answers. Enter Carl Gustav Jung, the Swiss psychiatrist and founder of analytical psychology, who spent decades exploring the deepest layers of the human psyche. Jung didn't come to the Tibetan Book of the Dead from a religious perspective. He approached it as a scientist, a psychologist, looking for insights into how the human mind works. And what he found shocked him. The deities, the bardos, the visions described in this ancient Tibetan text matched almost perfectly with structures he'd been discovering independently in his own patient's dreams, visions, and psychological journeys. Jung had developed a theory of the collective unconscious, the idea that beneath our personal unconscious, our individual repressed memories and experiences, lies a deeper layer of unconscious shared by all humanity. And within this collective unconscious are what he called archetypes, universal patterns or images that appear across cultures and throughout history. The hero on a quest, the great mother, the wise old man, the shadow, the dark, rejected parts of ourselves, the anima and animus, the feminine in men and masculine in women, the self, the archetype of wholeness and integration. These aren't just ideas or concepts, Jung said. They're living energies within the psyche that take form in dreams, visions, myths, and religious experiences across all cultures. And when Jung looked at the peaceful and wrathful deities of the Tibetan Book of the Dead, he recognized them immediately as archetypes. They were the same forces he'd been working with in his clinical practice, just described in Tibetan Buddhist language rather than Western psychological terminology. In his commentary on the Tibetan Book of the Dead, Jung wrote something profound. The world of gods and spirits is truly nothing but the collective, unconscious inside me. He put nothing but in quotes for a reason. He wasn't saying these experiences were just psychological, diminishing their reality or importance. He was saying they were psychological, which made them profoundly real in the ways that actually matter. Think about it. When you dream, are those dreams real? While you're in them, absolutely. They affect you emotionally. They reveal truths about your psyche. They can be healing or traumatic. The fact that they're just internal, just creations of your own mind, doesn't make them less real or less important. In some ways, it makes them more important because they're directly about you, your patterns, your healing. The same is true for the deities of the bardo. Whether or not they exist as independent external beings, and the Tibetan teachings themselves say they don't, that they're projections of mind, They're real as psychological and spiritual forces. They're real as experiences that consciousness encounters. They're real in their effects on you. Jung's concept of the shadow maps almost perfectly onto the wrathful deities. The shadow, in Jungian psychology, is everything we've rejected about ourselves, all the qualities we couldn't accept and pushed into our unconscious. But here's Jung's key insight that revolutionized psychology. The shadow isn't evil. It's not bad. It's just unintegrated. And anything unintegrated, anything we refuse to acknowledge, gains power over us precisely because it's unconscious. The shadow operates behind the scenes, sabotaging our best intentions, causing us to project our own rejected qualities onto others, seeing in them what we can't see in ourselves, keeping us stuck in patterns we don't understand. Jung spent his career helping patients integrate their shadow, and he noticed something remarkable. When people finally faced their shadow, when they acknowledged and integrated these rejected parts, the shadow transformed. What seemed threatening became a source of power, creativity, and vitality. Sound familiar? That's exactly what the Tibetan Book of the Dead teaches about the wrathful deities. Face them with recognition instead of fear, and they transform from demons into protectors. Jung wasn't borrowing from Tibetan Buddhism. He developed his theories independently through decades of clinical work with thousands of patients. But he arrived at the same conclusions that Tibetan masters had reached through meditation and contemplation over centuries. This convergence should tell us something profound. We're not talking about arbitrary cultural beliefs or religious dogma. We're talking about the actual structure of human consciousness, discovered through different methods, scientific psychology versus contemplative practice, but revealing the same underlying truths. Similarly, Jung's concept of the self with a capital S, to distinguish it from the everyday ego self, corresponds beautifully to the peaceful deities. The self in Jungian psychology is the archetype of wholeness, the totality of the psyche, both conscious and unconscious. The self represents your full potential, your completeness, everything you could be if all parts of you were integrated and functioning in harmony. In dreams and visions, it's often depicted as mandalas, sacred circles, divine figures, or luminous presences exactly like the peaceful deities. And here's Jung's crucial observation, the same one that Tibetan teachings make. Encountering the self is overwhelming. When patients had dreams or visions of the self, they almost always couldn't accept them. The self seemed too grand, too perfect, too numinous to be me. Jung called this the inflation problem. The ego, our ordinary sense of self, is too small, too limited to contain the self. So when we encounter the self, we either reject it as not me, which keeps us trapped in limitation, or we try to claim it as only me in an egoic way, which leads to grandiosity and delusion. The Tibetan teachings solve this problem brilliantly. They say, yes, these peaceful deities are you, they're your Buddha nature, but they're not your ego. They're your deepest essence, what you are beneath the ego. Recognizing them doesn't mean your ego becomes enlightened or special. It means you recognize that beneath the ego, there's something much vaster. Jung would say exactly the same thing in his language. The self isn't the ego inflated to cosmic proportions. It's what you discover when the ego relaxes its grip and allows something deeper to emerge. Both traditions, Buddhist and Jungian, emphasize the same crucial mechanism, projection. We take internal realities, qualities, and energies within our own psyche and project them outward. We see them as external beings or forces, separate from ourselves. This happens constantly in daily life. You project your anger onto someone else and see them as angry. You project your wisdom onto a teacher and see them as having something you lack. You project your shadow onto an enemy and see them as evil, while maintaining your own sense of innocence. Jung taught that psychological health requires taking back these projections. You have to recognize that quality I see in them, it's actually in me. That demon I see out there, it's actually my own shadow. That divine wisdom I see in the guru, it's actually my own potential. This is exactly what the Tibetan Book of the Dead teaches. The deities aren't really external. They're projections of your own mind. Liberation comes through recognition, through taking back the projections and seeing them as aspects of your own consciousness. But here's where both traditions acknowledge something subtle and important. Saying, it's all in your mind doesn't mean it's not real or not important. Your mind is the realest thing you have access to. Your internal experience is your reality. Working with these internal forces, these archetypes and energies, this is the most important work you can do. Because these forces shape everything. How you perceive reality, how you relate to others, what choices you make, what you're capable of experiencing and achieving. Jung developed a concept he called individuation, the process of becoming who you truly are, integrating all parts of the psyche into a coherent whole. This process typically involves, first, encountering and integrating the shadow facing your dark side. Second, recognizing and integrating the anima or animus, the contrasexual aspect within you. Third, facing and integrating other archetypes as they arise. And finally, encountering the self and achieving a kind of wholeness. Does this sound familiar? It's essentially the same journey described in the second bardo. You encounter peaceful aspects, the self, your highest potential, then wrathful aspects, the shadow, your rejected parts, and liberation comes through recognizing and integrating all of it. Jung observed that this individuation process often happens most intensely during what people call midlife crisis, or during major life transitions times, when your old identity breaks down and you're forced to confront parts of yourself you'd been avoiding. In other words, bardos. Life transitions where solid ground dissolves and you have to face your own psyche directly. The Tibetan teachings say you go through this process intensely after death in the second bardo. Jung says you go through versions of it throughout life during major transitions. Both are right. The death bardo is the ultimate, most intense version of a process that's actually happening repeatedly throughout life. Jung also wrote extensively about what he called the collective unconscious, not just your personal unconscious, your individual memories and patterns, but a deeper layer that's collective, shared by all humanity, containing the accumulated wisdom and experiences of our species. He believed that in certain states, particularly in deep meditation, in psychosis, or in near-death experiences, the boundary between personal consciousness and this collective layer becomes permeable. And what happens then? You start encountering archetypal figures, universal patterns, images, and energies that aren't specific to your personal history. The bardos, from this perspective, are a journey through the collective unconscious. When your personal identity dissolves at death, you fall back through layers of consciousness. First, your personal unconscious, your individual memories and unresolved issues. Then into the collective, the archetypal realm where the deities dwell, and potentially, beyond even that, into what both traditions point to as ultimate reality or pure consciousness. So why does all this matter for you right now in practical terms? Because for many modern readers, the Tibetan imagery can seem foreign, culturally specific, something that doesn't apply to them. I'm not Buddhist. I don't believe in Tibetan deities. This is interesting history, but it's not my path. But Jung demonstrates that we're not talking about Tibetan culture or Buddhist religion specifically. We're talking about universal structures of human consciousness. The peaceful and wrathful deities might wear Tibetan forms in this particular text, but the energies they represent exist in every human psyche, including yours regardless of your culture or beliefs. You don't have to become a Tibetan Buddhist to work with this wisdom. You can approach it psychologically, as Jung did, and still access its transformative power. When you face your shadow, you're working with the wrathful deities, whether you call them that or not. When you catch glimpses of your highest potential, you're encountering the peaceful deities. When you navigate a major life transition with consciousness and courage, you're practicing for the bardos. The language might be different, psychological versus religious, Western versus Eastern, but we're all working with the same fundamental realities of human consciousness. Both Jung and the Tibetan teachings agree on the central challenge: integration versus rejection or identification. You can't just reject parts of yourself. That creates shadow, repression, unconscious sabotage. But you also can't identify with archetypal energies in an egoic way. You can't say, I am the Buddha or I am the self from ego, because that creates inflation and delusion. The solution is recognition without identification. You recognize this Buddha nature, this wisdom, this compassion. This is my deepest essence, but I'm not claiming it as my ego's achievement or possession. This shadow, this anger, this darkness, this is part of me, but I'm not defined by it or controlled by it. This is a delicate balance, and both traditions acknowledge how difficult it is to maintain. Most people fall to one side or the other, either rejecting what they can't accept or inflating around what they can and claiming it as personal achievement. But learning this balance, this capacity to recognize and integrate without either rejecting or egoically identifying, this is perhaps the most important psychological and spiritual work any human can do. And you practice it in daily life, constantly. Every time you can acknowledge a quality in yourself, whether positive or negative, without either denying it or letting it define you completely, you're practicing this balance. Every time you can see your anger clearly, without either suppressing it or acting it out, you're doing the work. Every time you can recognize your own wisdom without becoming arrogant about it, you're building the capacity that will serve you in the bardos. Jung believed that understanding the journey described in the Tibetan Book of the Dead could be therapeutically valuable, even for people who would never experience it literally, who didn't believe in an afterlife or rebirth. Why? Because it provides a map of the psyche, a way of understanding the forces operating within consciousness. It normalizes experiences that might otherwise seem like madness or breakdown, encountering your own shadow, facing demons, meeting divine presences within. It shows that these aren't signs of pathology. They're part of the natural process of psychological and spiritual development. How many people have had powerful spiritual experiences, encounters with what felt like divine or demonic presences in meditation or dreams, and then thought they were going crazy? How many have faced their own darkness during a breakdown and felt overwhelmed, thinking something was fundamentally wrong with them? The Tibetan Book of the Dead and Jung's psychology both say, no, this is normal. This is the journey. These are the stages of transformation. Understanding the map helps you navigate without being overwhelmed or thinking you're losing your mind. Let me come back to the question we started with. Are the deities real? Jung's answer, and I think the most useful answer, is they're psychologically real. They're real as forces within consciousness. They're real in their effects. Whether they exist out there as independent entities in some metaphysical sense is ultimately less important than recognizing that they exist in here as powerful energies and patterns within the psyche. The Tibetan teachings themselves, when you dig into them deeply, say something remarkably similar. They emphasize that these deities are manifestations of your own mind, not external beings imposing themselves on you from outside. But your own mind is a lot bigger, a lot deeper, and a lot more mysterious than we usually think. It includes personal history, yes, but also collective patterns, archetypal energies, and ultimately, the nature of consciousness itself. So yes, the deities are real as psychological forces, real as spiritual energies, real as experiences that transform those who encounter them. Whether they're real in some ultimate metaphysical sense, whether they exist independently in some Buddhist Pure Land or Bardo realm, that's a question each person has to answer for themselves based on their own experience and understanding. But don't let metaphysical debates distract you from the practical power of these teachings. Whether you approach this material as a Buddhist practitioner preparing for death, or as someone interested in depth psychology and personal growth, whether you believe in literal rebirth or see it as a metaphor for psychological transformation, the wisdom remains the same. Your mind is powerful. It creates your reality through projection. It contains both light and shadow, both peaceful and wrathful energies. And liberation, whether you call it enlightenment or psychological wholeness or integration, comes through recognition, through seeing the true nature of these projections and integrating them rather than being swept away by them or continuing to reject them. That's true whether we're talking about the bardos after death or the challenges and transitions of life. It's true whether we use Tibetan Buddhist language or Jungian psychological concepts. The truth transcends the language used to describe it. And that truth, recognized by ancient Tibetan masters and modern Western psychologists alike, is this: know yourself, all of yourself, light and shadow, peaceful and wrathful, conscious and unconscious. Integrate yourself, bringing all the rejected and projected parts back home. And in doing so, free yourself from being unconsciously controlled by forces you don't understand. Are you ready to do that work? Are you ready to face the deities, both peaceful and wrathful, that exist within your own psyche right now? Because they're there, whether you acknowledge them or not. They're operating, influencing your choices and experiences, creating your reality through projection. The only question is whether you'll meet them consciously or unconsciously, with recognition or with fear and confusion. Jung spent his life helping people make that journey consciously, bringing the unconscious into consciousness, integrating the shadow, recognizing the self. The Tibetan Book of the Dead was written for exactly the same purpose, to help consciousness navigate these encounters with awareness, rather than being overwhelmed. Now it's your turn. Will you take up the challenge? Will you start looking at your own projections, your own shadow, your own highest potential? Will you do the work of integration while you're alive, while you have support and resources, rather than waiting until you're in the bardo with nowhere to hide? The peaceful deities are showing you what you could be. The wrathful deities are showing you what you've been denying. Both are invitations to wholeness, to freedom, to waking up. How will you respond? Chapter 9. The Magnetic Pull of Karma. Now imagine you're drifting in a formless sea. The peaceful deities appeared, offering liberation. You couldn't recognize them. The wrathful deities emerged, demanding integration. You were overwhelmed by fear. And now you're moving into the third and final bardo, where everything you've ever been, everything you've ever done, every pattern you've cultivated becomes a force pulling you toward your next existence. Welcome to the Siddha Bardo, the bardo of becoming, the threshold where your future is written not by fate or judgment, but by the accumulated momentum of your own mind. This isn't passive drifting. This is active creation, though most of it happens unconsciously, driven by forces you may not even be aware of. Every thought, every unresolved emotion, every karmic imprint you carry becomes a guiding force, a magnetic pull determining the trajectory of your next life. Your consciousness, stripped bare of the physical body and the familiar structures of identity, is now essentially pure potential shaped by patterns. And those patterns are pulling you irresistibly toward circumstances that match their frequency. Think about how magnets work. They don't choose what to attract. They simply pull toward whatever matches their magnetic field. That's karma operating in the third bardo. Your consciousness isn't rationally evaluating options. It's being drawn magnetically toward the life that resonates with the energy you've been cultivating. The text described this bardo as increasingly chaotic, increasingly intense. Visions flash before you, faces, landscapes, entire worlds, each one a potential doorway. You might see couples throughout different realms engaged in conception. You might experience entire scenarios of possible lives playing out. And here's what determines which doorway you move toward. Not conscious choice in the way you normally think of it, but karmic resonance. If you've lived with intense anger, you're pulled toward situations saturated with conflict and aggression. If you died attached to pleasure and comfort, you're drawn toward circumstances where those seem available, even if they ultimately trap you in cycles of craving. The text described visions of the 6 realms appearing, not necessarily as literal places you'll be reborn into, though they can be understood that way, but as fundamental states of consciousness, emotional tones that can dominate an entire existence. The God realms appear as places of beauty, pleasure, and pride. Everything seems perfect. But the teaching warns against rebirth there, because in too much comfort, there's no motivation for spiritual growth. You use up your good karma enjoying yourself, then fall when it's exhausted, unprepared for the suffering that inevitably comes. Think about this in your life now. Have you ever been in a period where everything was going so well that you became complacent? You stopped growing, stopped questioning, stopped practicing whatever had brought you to that good place? And then, when change inevitably came, you were completely unprepared. That's the trap of the God realms, whether literal or metaphorical. The jealous God realm appears as a space of power, competition, constant striving. You're always fighting for position, defending what you have, trying to get ahead. Some consciousness is strongly drawn to this because the energy matches their internal state. They've spent life competing, comparing, never feeling they have enough status or recognition. The human realm, Buddhism teaches, is actually the most precious for spiritual development because it provides the optimal balance, enough suffering to motivate you to seek liberation, but enough freedom and capacity to actually do the work. Yet most humans waste this precious opportunity, spending their lives in distraction and unconscious patterns. The animal realm represents consciousness dominated by instinct, by reactivity without reflection. Think about moments in your life when you've been purely reactive, driven by immediate needs and impulses without any capacity to step back and make conscious choices. That's a taste of animal consciousness. The hungry ghost realm manifests as states of insatiable craving. Imagine being perpetually hungry but never able to satisfy that hunger, perpetually thirsty but unable to drink. It's the realm of addiction, of needs that have nothing to do with actual lack, but everything to do with internal imbalance and attachment. And the hell realms appear as states of intense aggression, anger, and suffering, not eternal damnation. Buddhism doesn't teach that, but temporary states that burn themselves out eventually, though they can last for what seems like eons from within them. Now, whether you take these realms literally as different types of rebirth or see them as describing dominant psychological states, the principle is the same. You're drawn toward what matches your internal state, your habitual patterns, your karma. And here's where the teaching becomes urgently practical. You're creating this karma right now, in this life, with every choice you make. Every time you react with anger instead of pausing and responding with awareness, you're strengthening the karmic momentum toward angry states. Every time you grasp at pleasure or push away pain unconsciously, you're reinforcing patterns of attachment and aversion that will shape your experience. But in this is the hope embedded in the teaching. Every time you bring awareness to your patterns, every time you choose differently, every time you respond with wisdom instead of habit, you're changing your karma. You're shifting the magnetic field, altering the trajectory. The texts emphasize that in the third bardo, if you've developed strong awareness through meditation and practice, you can maintain some conscious influence even as these powerful forces are pulling you. Advanced practitioners are taught field consciousness transference, where you train to direct your awareness toward liberation or a favorable rebirth. But for most people, there isn't that level of control. They're swept along by momentum, by unresolved attachments, by the accumulated weight of habitual patterns. However, the texts emphasize that even in the midst of chaos, if you can recognize what's happening, if you can remember the teachings, there's still a chance for liberation. You can still stop the process by recognizing all these visions as projections of your own mind. This is why the practice of having the bardo theedle, read to the dying person is so important. Even if they couldn't achieve liberation in the first or second bardo, even if they're swept into the third, the words might break through, might remind them, might offer one last chance to wake up before rebirth happens. The visions become progressively more compelling, more convincing. What you see feels absolutely real. The pull toward certain situations becomes overwhelming, and then at a certain point, conception happens. Your consciousness merges with a new physical form, and you're launched into another life. The bardo is over. The cycle continues, unless you wake up, unless you recognize, unless you break the pattern. And that recognition, that capacity to wake up in the midst of the bardo, that's what you're developing right now in this life with every moment of practice, every choice made with awareness instead of habit. Chapter 10. Training for Death While Living. So how do you prepare for these bardos? How do you develop the capacity to recognize what's happening and respond with awareness instead of being swept away by fear and habit? Imagine preparing for death as if it's the most important journey you'll ever take, not a dreaded end, but a profound opportunity. This isn't morbid. This is the ultimate realism, the ultimate practicality. Tibetan Buddhism offers specific practices designed to prepare consciousness for the bardos. But here's what makes them powerful. These practices don't just prepare you for death. They transform how you live right now. Meditation on impermanence. Start each day with the awareness that this day is not guaranteed, that this might be your last chance to tell someone you love them, to do something meaningful, to practice, to wake up. This isn't meant to create anxiety. It's meant to create clarity. When you truly remember that life is precious and fleeting, everything shifts. Petty concerns fall away. What truly matters becomes obvious. Tibetan practitioners might contemplate, death is certain. The time of death is uncertain. At the time of death, only spiritual practice will help. Try this practice for just 1 week. Each morning, when you wake up, before you check your phone or rush into your day, pause and remember, I'm alive. This is not guaranteed. Today is precious. How do I want to live it? Watch what happens to your priorities, your patience, your presence. Tonglen, the practice of exchange. Tonglen is a practice of breathing in suffering and breathing out relief. It sounds counterintuitive. Why would you breathe in suffering? But the practice is profound. With each inhale, you imagine taking in the pain, fear, or suffering of others, or even your own suffering. With each exhale, you send out whatever they need: healing, peace, relief, joy. This practice does several things at once. It breaks down the artificial boundary between self and other. It develops compassion. It trains you to move toward difficulty instead of always trying to escape it. And crucially, it prepares you for the ultimate act of letting go that death requires. When you practice Tonglen regularly, you're building the capacity to face the bardos without being overwhelmed, because you've been practicing moving toward intensity rather than always seeking comfort. Phawa, consciousness transference. This is an advanced practice, traditionally taught only to students who've completed preliminary training. But the principle is important to understand. You can train to direct your consciousness at the moment of death. Phawa practice involves visualizing your consciousness, shooting out the crown of your head like an arrow, directed toward a specific destination whether that's a pure land, a favorable rebirth, or ultimate liberation. Advanced practitioners who've mastered this practice are said to be able to choose the moment and manner of their death, directing their consciousness with precision, even as the body fails. But even if you never master the full practice, understanding the principle is valuable. Where you aim your attention, your energy, your consciousness in life, that's the direction you're training yourself to go at death. If you spend your life with attention scattered, constantly distracted, pulled this way and that by every stimulus, that's the state you'll be in, at death scattered, reactive, unable to maintain direction. If you train attention to be stable, focused, able to maintain direction even in difficulty, that capacity will be there when you need it most. The power of mantras. Mantras are sacred sound formulas repeated thousands or millions of times. They're not magical spells. They're tools for training and stabilizing consciousness. The most famous is Om Mani Padme Hum, the mantra of compassion. Each syllable is said to purify a different aspect of consciousness, preparing you for the journey. When you repeat a mantra, you're doing several things: focusing attention, creating a positive imprint in consciousness, connecting with a lineage of practice stretching back centuries, and giving your mind an anchor it can return to in moments of difficulty. Tibetan Buddhists often practice with the goal of the mantra becoming so deeply ingrained that it continues spontaneously even at death, providing a thread of continuity and stability through the chaos of the bardos. Dream yoga, practicing in sleep. Every night when you fall asleep, you go through a mini-death. Consciousness separates from waking reality, moves through dream experiences, and returns upon waking. The Tibetan tradition developed elaborate practices of dream yoga learning to become conscious within dreams, recognizing that you're dreaming while still in the dream. Why? Because if you can recognize that a dream is your own mind's creation while still experiencing it as apparently real and external, you're practicing exactly what you need to do in the bardos. Recognize appearances as projections of your own consciousness. Start simple. Before sleep, set the intention to recognize your dreaming. Throughout the day, pause regularly and ask, "Am I dreaming?" Really look at your experience with that question. This builds the habit that might continue into dreams. When you do become lucid in a dream, practice. Remind yourself this is all your mind. Try to face dream figures instead of running. Transform frightening images with recognition. Every lucid dream is a training session for the bardos, the big picture. All of these practices share a common thread. They're training you to recognize the nature of mind, to maintain awareness through transitions, to face difficulty without running, and to remember the teachings when you need them most. But here's the beautiful paradox. While these practices prepare you for death, they make life immeasurably richer. When you live with awareness of impermanence, everything becomes more vivid, more precious. When you practice compassion, your heart opens. When you train attention, you're more present, more capable, more free. Preparing for death is actually the most life-affirming thing you can do. It strips away the illusions and the distractions and brings you back to what's real, what matters, what's true. And that's the real power of these teachings. They work whether death comes tomorrow or 50 years from now. They work whether there's an afterlife or not. They work because they're about waking up to reality, to the nature of your own mind, to the preciousness of this moment. So why wait? Why postpone the work that makes both life and death more conscious, more free, more complete? Start today. Pick one practice. Meditate on impermanence for 5 minutes each morning. Try Tonglen when you encounter someone suffering. Set the intention to become lucid in dreams. Repeat a mantra during your commute. Small, consistent practice accumulates. It changes neural pathways. It shifts your default responses. It prepares you, gradually but surely, for both the transitions of life and the ultimate transition of death. The bardos are coming, the small ones every day, and the ultimate ones at death. The only question is, will you be ready? Chapter 11. The Guide at Your Bedside. Now imagine you're lying on your deathbed. Your body is failing, your breath growing shallow, your familiar sense of self beginning to dissolve. In most modern Western settings, this moment is marked by clinical efficiency or uncomfortable silence, by medical interventions focused solely on the physical, or by well-meaning but vague reassurances that don't actually address what's happening. But in Tibetan tradition, something radically different occurs. A lama, a spiritual guide who has spent years studying and practicing the bardo theta, sits beside you. As your consciousness begins to separate from your body, this guide begins reading the text, describing in vivid detail exactly what you're about to experience. These aren't just comforting words. This is a roadmap being spoken directly to your consciousness, guiding you through territories that would otherwise be overwhelming and disorienting. O child of noble family, listen without distraction. The clear light of pure reality is now shining before you. Recognize it. This luminosity is your own true nature. Rest in that recognition. The guide continues, stage by stage, describing the peaceful deities that will appear, the wrathful deities, the visions of rebirth. With each stage, instructions. Don't be afraid. These are projections of your own mind. Recognize them as such, and you will be liberated. This practice treats death not as a medical failure or a tragedy, but as the most profound spiritual opportunity of your existence, a journey that can be navigated with awareness. If you have the right guidance and preparation, contrast this with typical modern approaches to death, where it's either medicalized to the point where the dying person is unconscious, or it's met with awkward avoidance because we don't know what to say, or it's wrapped in religious platitudes that may or may not match the dying person's actual experience. The Tibetan approach is radically practical. It says, here's what's going to happen. Here's how to navigate it. Here's what to recognize at each stage. Let me remind you of what you've been practicing your whole life. The guide becomes an anchor, a voice of wisdom and clarity when everything else is dissolving. They're there to remind you, you've trained for this. You know what to do. Don't be overwhelmed. Recognize the visions as your own mind. This is one of the deepest expressions of compassion, staying present with someone through the most intense transition of their existence, offering not false comfort, but true guidance. But here's an important point. You don't necessarily need an external guide if you've internalized the teachings yourself. If you've studied the bardo theta, practiced the meditations, familiarized yourself with the stages, then when the moment comes, some part of you will remember. That's why the practice during life is so crucial. You're not just learning information. You're imprinting wisdom so deeply that it becomes accessible, even when everything familiar is dissolving. The text itself says it offers liberation through hearing, meaning that even hearing the teachings at the moment of death, even if you didn't practice during life, can plant seeds of recognition that might bear fruit in the bardos. This offers hope. It suggests that consciousness remains receptive, that guidance can help, that it's not too late even at the moment of death to wake up. In modern context, even if you don't have a Tibetan Lama available, the principle still applies. Having someone present who understands these teachings, who can offer reminders and encouragement, who can help you stay focused on recognition rather than fear, this can make an enormous difference. And if you're the one sitting with someone who's dying, the greatest gift you can offer is presence, not trying to fix anything or deny what's happening, but simply being there with awareness and compassion, perhaps gently reminding them of whatever spiritual practice or understanding gave them strength in life. The Tibetan Book of the Dead challenges us to completely reimagine end-of-life care. What if death wasn't treated as a medical failure to be avoided at all costs, but as a profound spiritual opportunity? What if we prepared people not just for comfortable dying, but for conscious dying? This doesn't mean abandoning medical care or pain management. It means integrating physical care with spiritual guidance, recognizing that the dying person is embarking on a journey that deserves support, preparation, and skilled companionship. Chapter 12. Death as Your Greatest Teacher. What if I told you that by embracing death you could unlock a life of deeper purpose, clarity, and even joy? What if the very thing you're most afraid of is actually the key to living fully? Imagine living each day with the profound awareness that every breath might be your last. How might that change your choices, your relationships, the way you see the world? The Tibetan Book of the Dead isn't just a guide for the dying. It's a radical roadmap for how to live with true freedom and presence. In our modern world, death is the ultimate taboo. We hide it away, medicalize it, avoid talking about it. We treat it as a failure rather than a natural part of existence. But what if this very avoidance is holding us back from living authentically? The wisdom of the Tibetan Book of the Dead invites us to face mortality head-on, using it not as a source of fear, but as a powerful tool for transformation. Think about it. In the face of death, every petty concern falls away. The argument with your partner about dishes? Meaningless. The anxiety about what people think of you? Irrelevant. The obsession with accumulating more stuff? Absurd. Death strips away illusions and reveals what actually matters. Love, connection, meaning, presence, contribution. Imagine approaching life's changes, big or small, with the same awareness that Tibetan monks bring to the moment of death. Every breakup, every job loss, every period of uncertainty, these are all mini-deaths, transitions the teachings call bardos. What if, instead of feeling lost or overwhelmed, you saw each of these moments as a gateway to growth? This is the essence of living the wisdom. Every transition, every ending, is a beginning in disguise. The Tibetan masters teach that if you keep death always at your shoulder, as an advisor and friend, you'll never waste a moment on what doesn't matter. You'll never take your loved ones for granted. You'll never postpone joy or meaning or authentic living. Death isn't the enemy. It's the ultimate teacher, the wake-up call that reminds you to truly live. Start with a simple practice. Each morning when you wake, before reaching for your phone, pause and remember, I'm alive. This day is not guaranteed. This is precious. How do I want to live it? Watch what happens to your priorities. Petty conflicts lose their grip. You start to feel the vastness of each moment. Relationships deepen. You stop waiting for someday and start living now. Consider what would happen if you treated each encounter as if it might be your last with that person. Would you waste time on resentment or judgment? Or would you speak truth, express love, offer forgiveness? By embracing the reality of death, you're not being morbid, you're being awake. You're living with the awareness that everything is temporary, which makes everything infinitely precious. This is the profound liberation the teachings offer. When you fully accept impermanence, you stop clinging so desperately. You stop trying to freeze moments or people or circumstances. You let life flow, knowing that everything changes, and that's what makes it beautiful. Chapter 13. The Bardos in Daily Life. Here's what most people miss. You don't have to wait until death to experience the bardos. You're moving through them constantly. That disorientation when you're caught between sleep and waking, that's the first bardo in miniature, a moment when consciousness is less bound by ordinary structures, more fluid, more open to direct experience. Those rare moments of clarity when you're fully immersed in creating something, when time dissolves and you lose your usual sense of self. You're touching the edge of the second bardo, where the boundaries between self and experience become permeable. And every time you stand at a major life choice, feeling pulled in different directions, uncertain which path to take, you're in your own third bardo, experiencing how your patterns and karma pull you toward certain futures. The question isn't whether you'll face these bardos you already are constantly. The question is, are you navigating them consciously or unconsciously? Think about a relationship ending. In that moment, your old identity, I'm someone's partner, dissolves. You're in the gap, the bardo, before a new identity forms. Most people try to rush through this gap as fast as possible, immediately jumping into a new relationship or busying themselves with distractions. But what if you paused? What if you stayed present in the groundlessness, the uncertainty? That's where transformation happens. That's where you have the freedom to consciously choose who you'll become next, rather than just defaulting to old patterns. Or consider a job loss. Your professional identity has died. You're in a bardo. Do you panic and grab the first new job just to escape the discomfort? Or do you use this transition to ask, what do I actually want? What patterns from my old job do I want to leave behind? What new directions are now possible? Every transition is an opportunity for awakening if you approach it with awareness rather than just trying to survive it and get back to solid ground. The teachings are telling you, these moments of groundlessness, these in-between times when nothing is solid, these are actually the most powerful moments for change, for growth, for waking up. Chapter 14. When Ancient Wisdom Meets Modern Science. Now let's talk about what happens when this ancient wisdom meets cutting-edge science, because the convergence is remarkable. Thousands of people have been clinically dead hearts stopped, breathing ceased, brains showing no activity, and been brought back. What they report is strikingly consistent and eerily similar to what the Tibetan Book of the Dead describes. They talk about a brilliant light that feels like home, like unconditional love, like the most real thing, they've ever experienced. They describe meeting beings of profound wisdom. They report a life review where they experience the impact of all their actions. They felt a peace so complete that many didn't want to return. Skeptics say these are hallucinations from dying brains. Maybe. But how did Tibetan masters, with no modern resuscitation technology, no ability to interview people brought back from clinical death, describe these exact experiences centuries ago? Either it's an impossible coincidence, or contemplative practices gave them genuine insight into what happens when consciousness separates from the body. The mystery of consciousness itself remains unsolved. Despite all our neuroscience, we still can't explain how subjective experience arises from physical matter. This is called the hard problem of consciousness, and it's why some scientists are beginning to consider that consciousness might be more fundamental than we thought, not produced by the brain, but perhaps filtered or focused by it. If that's true, if consciousness is fundamental rather than emergent, then the Tibetan teachings about consciousness continuing after death become less far-fetched and more like an empirical claim that deserves investigation. We're at a fascinating moment where ancient spiritual wisdom and modern science are asking similar questions about the nature of consciousness, reality, and what it means to be human. The point isn't to prove or disprove anything. The point is that these teachings offer a framework for understanding consciousness and navigating transitions that works, whether you believe in literal rebirth or see it as metaphor. Conclusion. Your journey begins now. Consider this profound revelation. Death, far from being the end, is our greatest teacher in the art of living. We've journeyed through the wisdom of the Tibetan Book of the Dead, from the clear light of the first bardo to the peaceful and wrathful deities of the second, to the magnetic pull of karma in the third. We've explored how Jung saw these as universal archetypes, how you can prepare through practice, and how these teachings apply to every transition in your life. This ancient text challenges us to confront our mortality not with fear, but with courage and curiosity. Imagine approaching each day as if it were precious and fleeting, because it is. The bardos aren't just something that happens after death. They're happening right now. Every moment of transition, every ending and beginning, every dissolution of the familiar, these are your opportunities for awakening. So here's what matters most. What will you do with this knowledge? Will you close this book and return to life as usual, forgetting these teachings in the busyness of daily concerns? Or will you let this ancient wisdom penetrate your heart and transform how you live? The clear light is shining right now, in this very moment, as the awareness reading these words. The peaceful and wrathful deities are already within you, your highest qualities and your deepest shadows. The bardo of rebirth is happening continuously as you choose, moment by moment, who you're becoming. You don't have to wait for death to experience liberation. You can wake up right now. Start with a single breath, a single moment of awareness, a single choice to live consciously instead of sleepwalking through life. Remember, your thoughts shape the journey. You're not just a reader of this wisdom. You're a participant in the great mystery of consciousness itself. The Tibetan Book of the Dead has guided countless souls through the transition of death, but its deeper purpose has always been to wake us up to the preciousness of life, to remind us that death brings clarity, that impermanence makes everything precious, that our mortality is what gives life meaning. So I'll leave you with the ultimate question. If you knew you had only 1 year left to live, how would you change your life today? Here's the truth the Tibetan Book of the Dead wants you to understand. You do have limited time. We all do. The question isn't whether you'll die, but whether you'll truly live before you do. The clear light is here now, the bardos are calling. Your life is waiting. And death, your greatest teacher, is patiently reminding you, this moment is all you have. Make it count. The journey doesn't end here. It begins. Every breath is a new chance. Every moment is an opportunity to recognize, to wake up, to live fully. Before this book closes, before you move on to the next thing, take one conscious breath. One full, aware breath. And in that breath, recognize the miracle. You're alive. You're aware. You're here. That's the clear light. That's the teaching. That's everything you need. Now go. Live fully. Die consciously. And in between, shine your light so brightly that others can find their way home too. The bardos await. You are ready. Keep shining your light. Final words. The Tibetan Book of the Dead is not asking you to believe in Tibetan Buddhism. It's not asking you to accept reincarnation or deities or any particular metaphysics. It's asking you something much simpler and more profound. Look at your own mind. See how it creates your reality. Notice how you project your inner state onto the world. Recognize that liberation comes not from changing external circumstances, but from seeing clearly the nature of your own consciousness. Whether the bardos after death are literal experiences or powerful metaphors doesn't change their practical value. Whether consciousness continues after death or not doesn't change the fact that these teachings can transform how you live. What matters is this: are you awake? Are you present? Are you living with awareness of impermanence? Are you facing your shadows? Are you recognizing your own Buddha nature? These questions matter now, today, in this life. And if the teachings are right, they'll matter even more when everything familiar dissolves and only awareness remains. So prepare, practice, wake up, not someday, but now. The ultimate bardo, the one between reading these words and living them, that's the one you're in right now. How will you navigate it? The choice, as always, is yours. But know this, the clear light never stops shining. You just have to recognize it. Welcome home.